Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the Haunt Collection Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chris Codina, and unfortunately, it seems like it's becoming, as always, this episode is late. I'm sorry about that. I feel like I say that almost every time now. But the reason that it's been late is because I'm finally trying to do that non-fiction episode that I've been talking about since I started this, and it's been like, every time I've tried to do it, I don't like how it's going, and I stop. And I was already late last night, and I was trying to record it, and I felt like maybe I was getting somewhere, but it was so many attempts that I was up so late into the night that it got to the point where I feel like the last recordings I was doing started off okay, but then I started falling asleep while I was talking, and I would lose track of what I was saying. So yeah, it just didn't work out, and so that's why we're here late again. But hopefully it's worth it. We'll see if I like how this goes, and if you like how this goes, I'll definitely do more. I'm hoping to. This is hopefully some interesting stuff and some fun stuff to talk about. So without further ado, let me tell you all a story. In the south suburbs of Chicago, there's a village called Justice, Illinois, and in Justice, Illinois, there's a cemetery called Resurrection Cemetery. It's a Catholic cemetery located along Archer Avenue. Archer Avenue is a long main road, and it has plenty of stories to tell, but we're not focusing on them. We're focusing on one, probably the most famous one. As the story goes, there's some variations, but the gist of it is sometime in the 1920s, early 1930s, in the kind of the jazz era and all that, a young woman was having a night out at the O. Henry Ballroom, which is now the Willowbrook Ballroom, and either she left when the ballroom closed, or she got into an argument with her date. Either way, she left and began walking home along Archer Avenue. Naturally, tragedy struck when she was hit by a passing motorist and died and buried in Resurrection Cemetery. Not long after, in around 1939, the first sighting happened. A motorist was passing by Resurrection Cemetery and saw a young woman, blonde, blue-eyed, in a dress, like she had been out dancing, at the side of the road late at night, and he stopped to pick her up because, naturally, he thought that she was in trouble, but she got into the car and asked for a ride, and as he began to drive, he realized that as they passed Resurrection Cemetery, she disappeared. Had no idea where she went. The doors never opened. Stories like these have happened. Stories like these happened for several decades after. Similar tales, seeing a young woman along the road at night, trying to pick her up. One man even claimed that he picked up a young girl, and as he was driving along, she shouted for him to stop, stop, stop. This is it, to stop. And when he stopped, slammed on his brakes, he's like, where's your stop? And, he didn't see anything around. And she said, right there, and pointed. And he looked and he saw a little shack. And by the time he turned around, she was gone from the car. Door hadn't opened, nothing, just disappeared into thin air. Others even report seeing her in the dance halls in the area, There was a man who said that he even kissed a mysterious young woman who later disappeared without a trace. A cab driver dropped a young woman off at a different ballroom and came in to complain because she left without paying her fare, only to learn that no woman had come in. Perhaps my favorite story is about a man who was driving by Resurrection Cemetery late at night, and as he was passing the gate, he looked and saw a woman standing inside, gripping the handlebars, peering out. He got to the nearest phone and called the police, saying there was somebody trapped in the cemetery after hours. When the police got there, they didn't find anybody, but what they did find was the bars where this figure was holding on to were bent and burnt as if she had been trying to pry them apart. This is Resurrection Mary, probably Chicago's most famous ghost story, and we have several, and of the classification of the vanishing hitchhiker ghost, also probably the most famous. I don't think there has been a report of seeing Mary since the late 90s, as far as I can tell. Probably because picking up hitchhikers became less of a thing, and perhaps, depending on how you look at it, interest maybe waned in our little ghost story. But the reason I'm telling you this is because folklore and ghost stories like that, like ones that aren't, posted on No Sleep, ones that aren't, written in, a horror book, ones that aren't intentionally fictional, you know what I mean? Like ones that aren't, okay, this is a fictional story, here, read it, get spooked. Like I said, folklore, stories that people come up with, that they believe is true. I saw a ghost and I believe it. This is my story. Not only are those culturally important, and they can tell a lot about the culture and all that, and about people in general. Specifically, they're important to horror, because a lot of horror comes from these sort of, real life tales. And that's why I call this the non-fiction, because, the ghost of Resurrection Mary probably isn't real, but it's a thing that people believe to be real, and that that's where the non-fiction comes in. Plus, that's just sort of like fun, right? The whole collection thing is supposed to be like this. Oh, it's a library of spooky stuff, so I have my non-fiction section. You get it, right? Anyway, the reason I'm telling you all this is because it's important to horror, and it's also just like downright fun, right? I love this stuff. I love ghost stories. I love folklore. And I'm hoping to keep it fresh while still sort of on brand, I guess it would be. So there's a few things I want to talk to you about regarding this story. This story specifically, this kind of story, how it applies to horror, and probably for at least this episode, I want to talk to you a little bit about ghosts and like specifically my opinions on them, just to kind of get it out there. And like I said, because maybe it's fun to talk to and all that. So, with this story of Resurrection Mary, it's like I said, it's a vanishing hitchhiker tale. Vanishing hitchhiker tales, if you've ever heard urban legends and all that, it's you've probably heard of this kind of story. There's many variations on it, but essentially it amounts to someone picks up a hitchhiker at the side of the road. Eventually, it turns out that hitchhiker is a ghost. It might be that, similar to Mary, where they, disappear as you pass by the cemetery, or they give you an address and they disappear before you get there. And when you go and knock on the door, the person's parents answer and tell you that they've been dead for 5 years. They died in a car crash. Or one of the more romantic ones is a driver picks up a young woman off the side of the road at night and offers her his coat. And after she disappears, she also disappears with the coat. And when he finds out who she is, he goes and looks up, finds out that she's dead, and he goes and, to the cemetery to find her grave. And there's his jacket on the tombstone, stuff like that. You've probably heard these stories. And they're pretty classic. People have been telling vanishing hitchhiker stories since before there were cars. There was people passing, ghosts on the road when they were riding horses. It wasn't. This is a thing that has been going on a long time, and the question is why. And it's like I said, odds are Resurrection Mary not real. I'm pretty certain, from what I understand. I've seen a few somewhat contentious things, but doing my research of people who have reading things that people who are into Chicago ghost stuff have written. The whole thing with the handlebars happened because a truck backed into them, and that's why they bent, and they were burnt because maintenance crews took a blowtorch and tried to set them back into place. And it wasn't a ghostly woman trying to pry the bars apart. But the thing about this kind of stuff is, whether it's true or not, it's still effective. And that's what makes a good ghost story. Is for Resurrection Mary and for the Vanishing Hitchhiker specifically, the draw is the idea of you can see a ghost at any time. It's not somebody who went out to the old abandoned mansion in the woods, or somebody that is, creeping around the abandoned church at night, stuff like that. It's just somebody who's driving along and sees somebody in need, as far as they can tell. And it's not anybody that's looking to go see a ghost or anything like that, that's looking for trouble. It's and that's the appeal, right? It gives you the idea that, well, maybe I can run into a ghost at some point. And then it sort of becomes people want to go see it. You get, teenagers hear this stuff and they want to go driving out at night and seeing if they can catch a glimpse of Resurrection Mary or a white woman, lady in white along the road, or I can't think. There's another famous vanishing hitchhiker, I believe, in Washington State, who's pretty interesting, but I can't think of what it is. But yeah, it kind of becomes that thrill of maybe I can see a ghost, and that's the horror of it. Is you can run into a ghost at any time, but it's thrilling horror. It's like a haunted house. It's any horror for entertainment is thrilling. The idea of you could just be driving along and come across a ghost, and on top of that, not just spooky, floating sheet with eyes and a mouth hole, or rattling chains and stuff like that. It's a ghost that passes as a person, and the only reason you know it's a ghost is because they disappear. There's no blood, black eyes and extending jaws and all that. It's just a person, and again, that's the fun horror of it is it could be anybody. And like I said, hitchhiking isn't really a thing that much anymore. The days of that are past. It's pretty much accepted that it's a very dangerous thing to do. And not to like judge people who still hitchhike and all that, but just one of those where people don't do it as casually as they used to. It's more of a desperate thing. I can't say I've ever actually seen anybody hitchhiking in my entire life. But so because hitchhiking is kind of fallen off, I think these stories have kind of fallen off. I did try to look and see if there had been any more recent sightings of Resurrection Mary, just to see, just to talk about them. And I hadn't seen any, and I think I did specifically see someone mention that the last documented sighting was around 1997. So in a way, it's unfortunate or sad for me, I suppose, because and we're kind of transitioning into like my thoughts and like my personal thoughts and beliefs and all that. And it's sad for me because I like having mystery in the world, for several reasons. I suppose I should preface that thought with saying that I guess the best way to describe it is a very skeptical believer. I believe that ghosts exist, but I don't believe in most haunting stories. I don't believe that intelligent hauntings are as common as you might see on like ghost hunting shows and all that. I don't think that there are necessarily, sentient spirits walking around all over the place. I believe in, I suppose the best way to describe it is more of energies. I believe that things can kind of get stuck on a playback. So when you see, say you see that, strange woman walking down the road, it's not a conscious entity that's walking down the road. It's more of like this playback, residual haunting, it's called, where it's just kind of these energies kind of captured this moment in time and it plays back over and over, which the science is probably just as flimsy on that as it is on other hauntings, but it's just sort of like a thing I believe based on my own experiences. But even if it's not real, none of it's real. I like folklore, and not just because of the horror, but definitely because of that. I like it, like I said, because I like mystery in the world, and I am not anti-science or anything whatsoever. I am very much in support of scientific endeavors and all that, and discovering new things, but that's part of the thing. Discovering new things hinges on the fact of there still being mysteries in the world, right? It's sort of a catch-22, but the fun thing about stuff like ghosts and cryptids like Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and all that is odds are those will always stay mysteries because there might not be anything to discover. And in a way that's fun for me because it keeps imagination alive. And that's important. I think people who kind of turn their nose up at that stuff are a little misguided. Like, I certainly understand being, a realist and logical and all that, and not wanting to kind of, deal with these things that are, essentially fairy tales and all that. But the whole idea of, there being a dinosaur creature living in a lake in Scotland is great. It's fun. And then on top of that, you have people who think they see it and all that. And it probably aren't, but it's fun. It's fun to listen to people talk about it. It's fun to watch stuff about it. It's fun to speculate. My favorite Loch Ness Monster theory. Maybe I should save this for a Loch Ness Monster episode. No, let me talk about it now because it's somewhat related. My favorite Loch Ness Monster theory is that it is a dinosaur ghost. How great is that? Like, that's why there hasn't been any physical evidence left behind, because there isn't actually a dinosaur living in Loch Ness. It is the ghost of a plesiosaur, and that's what people are seeing. How great is that? It's so good. It's so fun and ridiculous. It might not necessarily be scary. Like, once you get to that territory, it's more goofy, like fun. But I love that. It's great. And I wanted to start talking about Resurrection Mary because, for one, the Vanishing Hitchhiker is pretty classic and it's pretty straightforward. There isn't a ton to analyze about it because it's like a ghost story in its purest form. It is, I saw a ghost and, I thought it was a real person and all that. Like, there isn't the moral story. There isn't, this just desserts turn or anything like that. There's no warning, really. It's, the warning is you might run into a ghost sometime. That's what it is. Or anybody can be a ghost and all that. And, that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it first, because it's sort of like this general encompassing thing about ghost stories. And it's one of my favorite stories of local lore. I've definitely driven, been in a car that was going by Resurrection Cemetery at night, and I would be lying if I didn't say I was keeping my eyes open on the road and all that, and looking to see if I saw anyone, because it's I think if there was, out of all the ghost stories I know, and I know many, if there was any ghost that I kind of would want to be real and encounter for myself, it would be Resurrection Mary. Like I said, because that's sort of like, it's the one. Like, it's the Chicago one. I'll probably, I imagine I might talk about more down the line, because like I said, Chicago has a lot of stories. Bachelor Grove, the Devil Baby, and all this good stuff, the Eastland, and then, of course, there's stuff all over the world I could talk about, and, but, me being from Chicago, I have a bit of a bias, but yeah, like I was saying, like, I would want to see Resurrection Mary, because it's such a pure ghost story. You know what I mean? It's this pure, like I said, it's a pure ghost story. It's it's just a young woman struck and killed by a car after a night out, and she relives that, and interacts with drivers along the road and all that. It's just, like I said, it's straight up pure ghost story, and odds are, definitely the odds are it is not real. I know I've read that there are 3 potential candidates for who Mary could be buried in Resurrection Cemetery. There's 3 Marys who fit the age and like description and lifestyle for the story of the ghost Mary. These 3 Marys were similar to her in life, but they could be none of them. It's just, maybe one of their deaths inspired the story, or it's just coincidence. Odds are, no, it's not real, but it's fun, because it's fun to think about, and it's fun the same way that horror is fun. Because, it's probably not real that, some tall guy, when I say probably, I mean definitely not real, that some tall, skinny guy in a suit with no face and tentacles coming out of his back tries to convince children to murder their peers. But it's an interesting story to read, and it's fun to get spooked. That's the thing. Horror is fun, and these ghost stories and folklore and urban legends and stuff. Those are the campfire tales. Those are the precursors to creepypasta and all that. Like, that's where creepypasta stemmed from, when it wasn't the campfire anymore. It was email chains and copypastas and all that. And so that's kind of why I wanted to go back and look at some of these sometimes, because, without these, we wouldn't have our Candle Coves and our Nancy's Goatman stories, and yes, even our Jeff the Killers and our Laughing Jacks and all that. We wouldn't have those. Yeah, like, these are probably might be shorter episodes, because obviously I'm not reading through anything. I'm just kind of telling a little story and giving my stream of conscious thoughts about it. But hopefully it's interesting, and hopefully, it's just interesting to think about and interesting to learn about if you didn't know these stories and all that. And maybe it's hubris or being egotistical that I think people care what I think and what I believe, but I don't know. I suppose I'll find out, gauging by the reaction to this and how I feel about it after I listen to the playback. But yeah, we'll see. This will probably wrap it up for the first of hopefully more Haunt Collection non-fiction episodes. So with that, later.